The crowd was deafening, a storm of voices echoing through the arena. Bright lights carved shadows across the mat as the reigning champion marched in, his grin dripping with arrogance. He raised his arms, soaking in the applause, while his eyes flicked to the man across from him, an outsider with no name, no backing, no chance, at least in their eyes. The champion chuckled, leaning toward his corner. "This will be over before it begins," he muttered. The words spread like wildfire, fueling the crowd's laughter. Commentators mocked. Officials smirked. Promoters exchanged knowing glances. The outsider was already defeated in their minds. But the bell shattered the noise. Seconds ticked. The underdog's fists moved like thunder. And in a flash, the king fell, silent, broken, sleeping on the canvas. Where are you watching the video? Comment, and if you like the video, please subscribe and like the channel. The street never slept. Even in the early hours, when the neon signs flickered weakly above shuttered storefronts, the city pulsed with an undercurrent of noise. Sirens wailed in the distance. Tires screeched against cracked asphalt. Somewhere close, a bottle shattered, followed by a burst of laughter that was more cruel than joyous. In those streets, a boy learned that survival wasn't a lesson, it was a demand. He wasn't born into comfort. His house was little more than a decaying block of brick wedged between liquor stores and pawnshops. The smell of stale beer drifted up the stairwell every night, mixing with cigarette smoke and the faint stench of desperation. His mother worked double shifts, her hands blistered and raw from factory labor. His father was already a ghost, a name spoken only in anger. That left the boy with the streets. And the streets showed no mercy. He learned to fight before he learned to read. Schoolyards became arenas, and fists replaced words. When bullies cornered him, he didn't back down. When hunger gnawed at his stomach, he stole and defended what he took. Every scuffle left his knuckles bruised, his face marked, but each scar became another line in his story. He wasn't fighting for pride. He was fighting because there was no other choice. At night, he'd slip into the abandoned gym at the edge of the neighborhood. The windows were boarded, the bags torn, the mats stained with years of forgotten sweat. But inside, it was a sanctuary. The heavy bag swung slowly, chains creaking with each strike. His punches echoed in the emptiness, a rhythm that drowned out the chaos outside. Each jab was sharper than the last. Each hook carried the weight of his hunger, his anger, his need to prove he existed. Older kids noticed. Some mocked him, others tested him. Underground fights became his stage. Crowds of shadows gathered in basements and warehouses, their voices thick with smoke and greed. Bets were shouted, money exchanged, the smell of cheap liquor filling the air. He'd step into makeshift rings, ropes tied together, floors slick with dirt, and face men twice his age, twice his size. He should have been crushed. But the streets had already hardened him. He didn't flinch when fists flew. He didn't retreat when blood blurred his vision. He fought like survival depended on every second, because it did. Whispers began to spread. The kid can take a beating. The kid doesn't stop. But with every victory came dismissal. To outsiders, he was just another nameless fighter swinging wild in illegal bouts. They didn't see his discipline, his hours alone in the broken gym, his obsession with perfecting each movement. They only saw a brawler, a product of the gutter. And the gutter, in their eyes, could never breed greatness. Still, he pushed forward. Coaches from neighborhood gyms would sometimes watch, shaking their heads as he sparred. "Too raw," they muttered. "Too wild. He'll burn out before he gets anywhere." He absorbed their words like blows to the ribs, painful, but not enough to stop him. The ring, no matter how makeshift, was the only place he felt alive. The chants of gamblers, the sting of sweat in his eyes, the pounding in his chest, it all became fuel. His body transformed into a weapon forged by hardship. Hands wrapped in tattered tape became steel. Shoulders carved from endless push-ups in narrow hallways grew solid. Legs, trained from sprinting across rooftops to escape trouble, carried explosive power. But what made him different wasn't muscle, it was fire. A fire that couldn't be taught in polished gyms or suburban dojos. A fire that came only from being told, day after day, that you were nothing. One night, in a warehouse filled with smoke and noise, he faced a local favorite, a towering man with tattoos creeping across his arms and a reputation for ending fights quickly. The crowd expected a slaughter. The bookies laughed as they collected bets. But when the first punch landed, it was the giant who stumbled. The boy pressed forward, fists flashing like lightning. Minutes later, the crowd was silent. The favorite lay crumpled on the ground. For a brief moment, he tasted respect. Strangers nodded. Money was shoved into his hands. But it didn't last. Outside the warehouse, whispers shifted. Just luck. One good night. The promoters who ran the circuits sneered. A street rat can't last. He'll get chewed up when the real fighters come. Their laughter followed him home, echoing in his ears louder than the cheers had. The injustice was clear. Fighters with polished backgrounds, with sponsors and shiny gym affiliations, were given chances. They lost, yet still climbed higher. He won, but remained invisible. No contracts. No recognition. Just another shadow in the underground. The system wasn't built for someone like him. It was built to protect the chosen, the marketable, the ones who looked good on posters. He was none of those things. He was a reminder that real fighters didn't need polish. And that was dangerous to those in power. Still, he didn't stop. Nights bled into mornings as he trained alone, his breath visible in the cold air of the abandoned gym. Calluses split open. Ribs ached. But he kept going. With each strike, he whispered to himself, one day, he'd break through. One day, they'd have no choice but to see him. But the street had its own way of testing patience. The more he fought, the more the system pushed back. Referees in underground matches turned blind eyes when opponents cheated. Promoters deliberately stacked him against bigger, fresher fighters. Judges called decisions against him, even when he dominated. Every win was stolen, every loss magnified. The cruelty wasn't just in the fights. It was in the stares from officials who saw him as a pawn. It was in the smirks of commentators who dismissed him as entertaining but unrefined. It was in the silence of sponsors who pretended he didn't exist. The injustice became a shadow that followed him everywhere. Yet shadows don't break a man forged by the streets. They sharpen him. Each slight, each betrayal, became another log on the fire burning in his chest. He didn't fight for belts or fame. He fought to prove that men like him, discarded, underestimated, mocked, could not only survive but rise. And rise he did. Fight after fight, his reputation grew. Underground legends whispered his name. Fans began to follow, hungry for a fighter who reminded them of struggle, of grit, of raw survival. He wasn't polished. He wasn't pretty. But when he stepped into a ring, the air thickened and eyes locked on him. Still, the system laughed. Still, the doors stayed closed. He stood outside arenas, watching posters of champions plastered across walls. Their smiles, their sponsorships, their easy rise through the ranks, it all mocked him. He clenched his fists, whispering the words that had carried him since childhood, "They don't know what's coming." Because in his heart, he knew. The streets hadn't just bred a fighter. They had bred a storm. And storms don't knock politely. They crash the gates. The night would come when the system's chosen king would laugh at him, dismiss him, mock him in front of the world. But the streets had prepared him for that moment. 30 seconds. That's all it would take. And when that night came, the laughter would end. The morning sun cast a dim glow across the cracked windows of the old gym. Dust floated in the air like faint ghosts, caught in the slant of light as the fighter wrapped his hands. His knuckles were raw, skin split and hardened into stone. Each layer of tape was another reminder. No one gave him protection. No promoter handed him gear. No sponsor supplied gloves. He had only what the streets provided. And still, he prepared, because the war wasn't over. Beyond the gym walls, a different world thrived. The world of polished arenas, spotless rings, and contracts stacked in leather briefcases. That world was guarded by the gatekeepers, promoters, officials, and managers who decided who was worthy of opportunity. Their voices carried weight. Their signatures built champions. And to them, the street fighter was invisible. Or worse, he was a joke. He'd been invited once, reluctantly, to a press event. A promoter with a sharp suit and a smile that never reached his eyes introduced him to a crowd of journalists. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled, but the questions were not about his story, his struggle, his victories. They laughed as they asked him how it felt to fight in basements, to sleep in a car before matches, to scrape money for tape. One reporter smirked and muttered, "He's not a fighter, he's an act." The room erupted in chuckles, and the promoter didn't stop them. He smiled wider, because in their eyes, humiliation was marketable. Behind closed doors, conversations were worse. He overheard it once in a hallway, the voices of men who controlled the stage. "He's not marketable," one said, his tone dripping with dismissal. "He doesn't have the look. No sponsors will touch him." Another laughed, "He's just a brawler. Keep him around to make others look good. Feed him to the big dogs, get them highlight reels." Their words weren't just cruel. They were calculated. They weren't building his career. They were building his role as cannon fodder. And so the pattern began. Fight offers came, but not the kind that opened doors. They threw him into cages with carefully selected opponents, fighters protected by the system, men with polished records and clean images. The plan was simple. The street fighter would lose, and the chosen ones would climb higher. If he won, the narrative would shift. It was a fluke. The other fighter wasn't ready. They always had an excuse. Victory was never his to own. The injustice cut deeper when he saw who received the red carpets. Fighters with half his heart, half his grit, were celebrated. They wore designer suits, their faces on billboards, their smiles plastered across posters. Promoters boasted about their talent, judges praised their skill. Yet behind the spectacle, he saw the truth. These were investments, not warriors. They were products being sold, and the system needed losers to build their wins. He was chosen to be that loser. Still, he didn't stop. He signed the contracts, no matter how unfair. In one fight, the referee turned away when his opponent landed an illegal strike. The crowd saw it. His coach shouted in rage. But the referee shrugged, the promoter smirked, and the match went on. In another, the judges robbed him outright, raising the hand of a man he had dominated for 3 brutal rounds. The crowd booed, their voices echoing through the arena, but the decision stood. Injustice wasn't an accident. It was the design. Every time he protested, he was silenced. Promoters leaned close, their words laced with venom. "Don't make trouble. You're lucky we even put you on the card." Their smiles hid daggers. "Play your role, or you'll never fight again." The message was clear. He wasn't there to rise. He was there to be used. And yet, something unexpected began to stir. The crowd, the very people the promoters thought would laugh, started to see the truth. Fans noticed how decisions slipped from his hands. They saw the bias, the unfair matchups, the corruption. They whispered about the way he kept fighting anyway, about the fire in his eyes even when everything was stacked against him. The promoters couldn't control whispers. And whispers, in the dark, can grow into roars. But for the fighter, the weight of injustice was suffocating. Nights were long. He'd sit alone in that broken gym, sweat dripping onto mats stained with time, and wonder if they were right. Maybe he was just a street brawler. Maybe the system was too strong. The thought haunted him like a shadow at his back. Every time he tried to outrun it, it followed, whispering doubt. Still, the fire refused to die. He remembered every sneer, every dismissal, every mocking laugh at press conferences. They thought they could write his story. They thought they could reduce him to a stepping stone. But he knew something they didn't. They couldn't understand the hunger of a man who had nothing to lose. That hunger was about to collide with arrogance on a stage much larger than a warehouse fight. The promoters, desperate to boost their champion's image, finally gave him the call. They framed it as an act of generosity, as if they were granting him a gift. "You'll fight the champ," they told him, their smiles tight, hiding the real plan. "He'll destroy you. The fans will love it." The fighter nodded, saying nothing. But deep inside, he felt the storm building. They thought they were feeding him to their king. They didn't know they were unleashing a wolf. He left the meeting with his jaw clenched, his mind echoing with their laughter. The streets had prepared him for betrayal. The gyms had hardened him for injustice. And the promoters, those gatekeepers who mocked him, had just opened the gates themselves. The air outside was cold that night. He walked beneath flickering streetlights, the city around him buzzing with sirens and whispers. He thought of every fight that had been stolen, every round ignored, every chance denied. His fists clenched at his sides. The silence pressed down heavy, broken only by his own voice. 30 seconds, he whispered. That's all it takes. The system didn't know it yet. But their arrogance had set the stage. And soon, the world would watch the walls of their empire crack. The spotlight was his throne. Whenever the champion entered the arena, the world bent around him. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. Music thundered. Fans roared his name until the walls shook. He walked with his chin high, chest out, and the smug certainty of a man who had never been told no. To his followers, he was untouchable. To promoters, he was a goldmine. And to the street fighter, he was the symbol of everything wrong with the system. The champion had been groomed since the beginning. Hand-picked by promoters, coddled by officials, blessed by sponsors. His record gleamed, padded with opponents chosen carefully to make him shine. When judges were needed, they leaned his way. When referees were tested, they looked the other way. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a product, marketable, protected, wrapped in the armor of corruption. Press conferences turned into performances. The champion strutted onto the stage in tailored suits, sunglasses hiding eyes that glimmered with contempt. Reporters hung on every word, their pens ready to write headlines before he finished speaking. He'd smirk, lean into the microphone, and ridicule whoever dared to stand across from him. So when the street fighter's name appeared beside his, the champion laughed. He didn't just laugh, he ridiculed. "Who is this guy?" he asked, turning to the promoters with exaggerated disbelief. "You pulled him out of a gutter? What's next? You gonna let the janitor fight me?" The room erupted in laughter. Cameras clicked, capturing his grin as though it were gospel. The street fighter sat silently, jaw clenched, while the mockery rained down. Reporters joined in, one asking, "How does it feel to fight someone with no pedigree, no ranking, no shot?" The champion didn't miss a beat. "It feels like charity work," he quipped. "I'll give him 15 seconds of fame before I put him to sleep." The injustice wasn't just in the words. It was in the smirks of the promoters who let it happen, the judges who chuckled in the back, the sponsors who nodded approvingly. The ridicule wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated. The champion's arrogance was useful. It drew headlines. It sold tickets. And humiliating the outsider made for a better story. But arrogance is blinding. In training sessions broadcast for the public, the champion mocked the very idea of preparation. He danced, clowned, and sparred half-heartedly while cameras rolled. "This fight's already over," he declared. "Why waste energy on a nobody?" His followers cheered. The promoters grinned. The machine kept rolling. Behind closed doors, though, the contempt went deeper. At a dinner with officials and sponsors, the champion raised a glass. "This fight will be a highlight reel," he boasted. 30 seconds, maybe less. His laughter was loud, echoing across the polished table. Promoters joined in, secure in their belief that the system had already written the ending. But while they laughed, the street fighter trained. Alone, in silence, in shadow. While the champion basked in the spotlight, the outsider bled in forgotten gyms. And though no cameras captured it, a storm was brewing, one strike at a time. The champion's arrogance began to infect everything. He insulted the underdog during interviews, calling him a sideshow attraction. He mimicked his fighting stance on television, staggering drunkenly until the crowd howled. He mocked his clothes, his lack of sponsors, even his background. "You can't buy heart at a pawn shop," he sneered, "but maybe he'll find some coins there after I'm done." Every insult spread across social media like wildfire. Memes mocked the street fighter. Headlines parroted the champion's words. The narrative was written, a king humiliating a pauper. The injustice wasn't just personal, it was public. The entire system colluded in turning the fight into a spectacle of ridicule. And yet, arrogance has a shadow. Beneath the bravado, cracks began to show. In one interview, the champion slipped, admitting he hadn't watched any of the street fighter's past matches. "Why bother?" he shrugged. He's just another brawler. Easy money. The promoters didn't correct him. Why would they? The lie served them too well. But whispers traveled. Fighters in smaller gyms spoke quietly of the outsider's grit, his discipline, his fury. Trainers exchanged glances when his name came up. They knew something the champion refused to see. They knew the streets didn't produce clowns. They produced survivors. Still, the machine marched forward. The weigh-in became another stage for mockery. Cameras crowded the stage, lights burning hot. The champion swaggered forward, towering in presence if not in height, his grin sharp as a blade. When the outsider stepped up, the champ slapped the back of his head, pushing him forward like a child. The crowd laughed. Officials chuckled. Promoters smiled wide, pretending it was harmless fun. But the outsider didn't laugh. His eyes burned, steady and unflinching, locked on the man who thought himself untouchable. He didn't respond with words. He didn't push back. He simply stared, the silence heavier than any insult. That silence lingered long after the cameras shut off. It followed the champion to his hotel suite, where he boasted to his entourage. It lingered in the minds of the few who noticed, the way the outsider didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't break. Injustice had done its work. The system had given the king every advantage. The underdog was ridiculed, dismissed, painted as a joke. But in their arrogance, they had given him something else too, a reason. The night was coming. The cage would close. And arrogance would meet hunger. The promoters thought they were feeding their golden boy a victim. The champion thought he was stepping into an easy payday. The fans thought they were watching a slaughter. But storms don't announce themselves. They arrive suddenly, violently, and in less than a minute, everything they thought they knew would be shattered. The arena lights had dimmed, but the echoes of laughter lingered. The champion's jokes, the reporters' chuckles, the smug smiles of the promoters, they clung to the air like smoke. The outsider walked alone through the hallways, fluorescent lights buzzing above, pipes rattling in the walls. His footsteps echoed against the concrete, steady, deliberate. Silence followed him, but behind that silence, whispers had begun to spread. They weren't the whispers of fans or reporters. These were quieter, darker. Spoken in locker rooms, in offices, in the shadows where deals were made. Whispers about how the fight was more than entertainment. Whispers that the outcome had already been written. He overheard some of it by accident. One night, as he lingered near the back corridors of the gym, two voices drifted through a half-open door. "Doesn't matter what happens," one voice muttered, low and sharp. "The champ's walking out with his hand raised." "What if the kid catches him?" the other asked, almost nervous. A laugh followed, cruel and dismissive. "Then we fix it. Judges are already lined up. The payout's too big to risk. You think the promoters are leaving this to chance?" The outsider froze, his hand tightening around the strap of his worn gym bag. He'd suspected corruption, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach twist. They weren't just mocking him, they were actively plotting against him. The whispers grew louder in the days that followed, though always hidden from the cameras. He saw referees shake hands with the champions team in back rooms, their laughter suspiciously warm. He noticed officials whispering with sponsors, heads close together, eyes darting toward him before turning away. Even his training times at the gym were tampered with, equipment missing, schedules suddenly shifted, doors locked when he arrived. The system wasn't just against him. It was suffocating him, wrapping chains around his every move. Still, he trained. Each punch cracked against the heavy bag like thunder. Each kick snapped through the air with fury. Sweat poured down his face, dripping onto the stained mats of the forgotten gym. Shadows clung to the corners, but in those shadows, he found focus. If they wanted to bury him, they would have to dig deeper. One night, while leaving training, he crossed paths with an old cutman who had worked fights for decades. The man's face was lined like cracked leather, his eyes tired but sharp. He stepped close, his voice barely a whisper. "They've already decided," the cutman said. "Doesn't matter how well you fight. They'll tilt it." The outsider stared back, jaw tight. "Then I won't give them a chance." The old man studied him, then nodded slowly. "Careful. They don't like surprises." The warning lingered like smoke in the air. Rumors thickened. A judge had been seen dining with the champion's manager. Promoters were overheard boasting about easy money. Even the commentators rehearsed their lines, preparing to paint the outsider as reckless, lucky at best, undeserving at worst. The narrative was set before a punch had even been thrown. But whispers have a way of slipping beyond control. Fans began to notice the cracks. On message boards, in back-alley conversations, in crowded bars, they murmured about the bias. Why's the kid always getting the short end? Why do the refs let the champ cheat? Their questions spread, slow but steady, planting seeds of doubt in the story the system wanted to sell. Meanwhile, the outsider carried the weight in silence. Alone in his room, he wrapped his fists until the tape bit into his skin. He shadowboxed in the glow of a single flickering bulb, his reflection fractured in a cracked mirror. He whispered to himself, steady, deliberate, "They can't take what I finish." Because that was the truth. Judges could be bought. Promoters could conspire. Officials could cheat. But a clean knockout, 30 seconds of undeniable truth, was beyond their control. That became his obsession. Every punch he threw in training was aimed at ending everything before the system had a chance to twist it. The whispers continued, growing darker. At a sponsor's dinner, a wealthy backer leaned close to the champion and said, "Don't worry. We've greased the right palms. Just make it entertaining. Humiliate him. Showboat. Give the crowd a laugh before you put him down." The champion grinned, sipping his drink, arrogance dripping from every word he spoke. "Don't worry. I'll make him wish he stayed in the gutter." Those words filtered back. Someone who worked the event repeated them in hushed tones to a trainer, who then passed them to another. By the time they reached the outsider, the words had sharpened into a knife. Humiliate him. That was the plan. The injustice was suffocating, but the fire in his chest grew hotter. They thought they could script his defeat. They thought they could use him as a prop in the champion's show. But they didn't understand. He wasn't walking into their cage to play a role. He was walking in to rewrite the story. Still, he knew the danger. Fighters who resisted the system often disappeared. Contracts canceled, opportunities vanished, careers buried under excuses. He'd seen it happen. Whispers told of men who refused to play along, who had suddenly failed drug tests, who had injuries fabricated by promoters to erase them from cards. The system protected itself like a wounded animal, lashing out at anyone who threatened its power. But he wasn't afraid of being erased. He had nothing to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous of all. The night before the weigh-in, he sat in the old gym, lights off, the city's noise faint through the cracked walls. He breathed slowly, fists clenched, his body still trembling from the day's training. The shadows pressed in, heavy and quiet. Then, almost like a voice rising from the darkness itself, he whispered to no one but himself. 30 seconds. The words echoed off the walls, sharp and certain. Because in a world of whispers, he had found his truth. And truth was louder than corruption, louder than arrogance, louder than all the laughter in the world. When the cage doors closed, there would be no whispers. There would be fists, sweat, and silence. And in that silence, the system's lies would shatter. The whispers might belong to them. But the storm belonged to him. The city outside pulsed with noise, horns blaring, drunks shouting, sirens wailing in the night. But inside the old gym, there was only silence, broken by the dull thud of fists against leather. The heavy bag swung wildly, chains squealing overhead, as sweat dripped from his face to the stained mats below. The world might have laughed at him, but here, in the shadows, he built his answer. Every morning began before dawn. The air was still cold, breath visible in the dim light as he tightened his hand wraps with ritual precision. His knuckles were already raw, skin torn and hardened into scars, but pain had long ago stopped being an obstacle. Pain was the currency of survival. Each strike was a deposit, each bruise an investment. He had no state-of-the-art facility, no nutritionist monitoring meals, no cameras documenting his progress. Just rusted weights, bags patched with duct tape, and a cracked floor that groaned under his footsteps. The smell of old sweat clung to the walls, mixing with the faint metallic tang of blood. It was a forgotten place, abandoned by the system that had written him off. But for him, it was a forge. And he was the iron. His coach, a grizzled veteran who'd seen more fighters broken than built, watched quietly from the corner. The old man had no illusions about the game. He'd worked corners for champions and journeymen alike, and he knew corruption when he saw it. Still, he believed in one thing: preparation. And in the outsider, he saw a man who refused to quit. "Keep your hands high," the coach barked, his voice gravelly, cutting through the silence. The fighter adjusted, sweat flying as he snapped another jab. The rhythm was relentless. Jab, cross, hook. Over and over, until the sound filled the room like drums of war. His shoulders ached, his lungs burned, but he pushed through. Because he knew what they were planning. He knew they were waiting to laugh again. "They don't respect you," the coach muttered, stepping closer, his voice dropping low. "They think you're a clown. They think this is a payday for him." The fighter said nothing. He only hit harder. "You hear me?" the coach pressed. Finally, the fighter whispered, almost to himself, "They'll respect 30 seconds. The old man paused, watching him with a mixture of concern and admiration. He'd trained many fighters, but few carried this kind of fire, the kind that didn't fade when the world spit in their face. Days blurred into weeks, each session heavier, darker. Mornings were sprints through alleys, lungs burning as the city still slept. Afternoons were hours of grappling on worn mats, the smell of mildew thick in the air. Nights ended with fists pounding until his arms trembled, until his body screamed for rest, until silence was broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. The shadows became his companions. No cameras followed him. No reporters sought interviews. While the champion bathed in attention, flashing his smile under bright lights, the outsider toiled in obscurity. Yet that obscurity became his weapon. No one saw what he was building. No one measured the fury gathering in his strikes, the precision sharpening with each repetition. They laughed at his silence, but silence was the storm's calm before it broke. His body transformed in those shadows. Every muscle hardened, carved by endless repetition. Calluses grew thicker, scars multiplied. He was not sculpted like the polished champions posing for posters. He was forged, rough and unrefined, like steel pulled straight from fire. The injustice fueled him. Every mocking headline became another rep. Every insult replayed in his mind as he sprinted, pushed, lifted, bled. When his lungs wanted to quit, he remembered the champion's smirk. When his hands split open, he remembered the laughter of promoters. When his legs shook with exhaustion, he remembered the judges who stole his victories. Each injustice was gasoline poured into the flames. Late one night, as the gym lights flickered, the coach spoke again. "They'll stack the deck against you. You know that." The fighter wiped sweat from his brow, his chest heaving. "Then I'll flip the table." The coach stared at him, searching his face. "You don't get it. They want you broken. They'll do anything to protect him." The fighter's eyes burned, steady and cold. "Let them try." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the steady creak of the bag swinging. The old man nodded slowly. He'd seen arrogance in many fighters, but this wasn't arrogance. This was inevitability. Outside the gym, whispers continued. People talked of the mismatch, of how quickly the champion would dispatch him. Commentators rehearsed their lines, sponsors polished their smiles. But none of them saw the war unfolding in the shadows. None of them understood the hunger carved into his bones. As the fight drew closer, the weight of injustice pressed harder. He saw the champion on television, lounging with reporters, mocking him again. "This guy's not a fighter," the champ laughed. "He's just a warm-up. I'll clown him, then put him to sleep. Easy." The audience laughed on cue, feeding the arrogance. The fighter turned off the screen, sitting alone in the dark. His reflection in the broken mirror stared back, sweat-soaked, scarred, but unbroken. He whispered the words again, 30 seconds. Training intensified. His coach pushed him harder, testing every limit. Grappling drills until his arms felt torn from their sockets. Striking until his vision blurred. Conditioning until his lungs screamed for air. Yet through it all, he never broke. "Why do you keep pushing like this?" the coach asked one night, voice hoarse. The fighter leaned against the ropes, drenched in sweat, eyes blazing. Because I can't let them write my story. The old man nodded. No more words were needed. The night before the weigh-in, the gym was silent except for the sound of fists striking the bag. Outside, rain pounded against the windows, streaking the glass with rivulets of water. Inside, the fighter moved like a machine, each punch cracking like thunder. His shadow stretched long across the wall, flickering with the storm's flashes. He paused only once, leaning against the bag, breathing hard. The coach stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. Tomorrow, they'll try to humiliate you. They'll laugh. They'll mock. They'll treat you like dirt. The fighter's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. Good. The coach frowned. Good. The fighter's voice was low, steady, certain. Because the more they laugh, the harder it'll hit when they're silent. The storm raged outside, but inside, another storm waited. Not of thunder or lightning, but of fists, rage, and unbreakable will. The shadows had done their work. The fighter was ready. And the world had no idea what was coming. The weigh-in stage was a theater, and the promoters knew exactly how to set it. Bright lights washed over the platform, glaring down on a sea of reporters, flashing cameras, and cheering fans packed shoulder to shoulder. Music pounded through the speakers, a beat designed to electrify the crowd, to make the event feel like more than numbers on a scale. It wasn't about weight. It was about spectacle. The champion arrived first. Draped in designer clothes, sunglasses perched arrogantly on his face, he strutted onto the stage with the confidence of a man who believed the world bent beneath his feet. The crowd erupted, chanting his name, voices echoing like thunder across the venue. He flexed for the cameras, blew kisses to the audience, then tossed his jacket aside with theatrical flair. The scale might as well have been a throne. When the outsider stepped forward, the mood shifted. The cheers died into murmurs, then laughter. He wore no jewelry, no designer suit, no entourage. Just sweatpants, worn sneakers, and the kind of scars you couldn't buy. Cameras zoomed in on the differences, the headlines already written, the king and the pauper. The champion smirked as the outsider stood on the scale, expression cold, eyes fixed straight ahead. The announcer called the number, confirming what everyone already knew, he was ready. But the moment wasn't his to own. As he stepped down, the champion pounced. He closed the distance with swagger, his grin stretching wide. Without warning, he slapped the back of the outsider's head, shoving him forward slightly. The crowd roared with laughter. Commentators laughed too, their voices dripping with mockery. "Looks like the champ just checked his chin early," one shouted. The promoters smiled wide, basking in the spectacle. To them, humiliation was just another tool to sell tickets. The outsider didn't react. He stood tall, jaw tight, eyes unflinching. His silence was louder than the laughter, but silence didn't make headlines. The cameras focused on the champion, who raised his arms in mock victory, soaking in the adoration. Reporters shouted questions, their voices sharp and mocking. "How do you plan to survive even one round? Do you think you deserve to be here?" Their pens scratched furiously, recording every insult, every smirk. The champion leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This guy doesn't belong in the cage. He belongs in the crowd, buying a ticket like everyone else. Tomorrow night, I'm gonna clown him. I'll toy with him, embarrass him, and then I'll put him to sleep. 30 seconds, maybe less." The crowd roared approval. Cameras flashed. Social media exploded. Headlines were written before the words even left his mouth. The champ promises a quick KO. And still, the outsider said nothing. He stood motionless, eyes locked on the man who mocked him. No smirk. No flinch. Just fire smoldering in silence. The injustice was heavy in the air. The promoters reveled in it. They whispered to each other at the side of the stage, their grins sharp. The champion's arrogance was good for business. His cruelty was marketable. Humiliating the outsider was part of the script, and everyone played their role. Everyone but him. The press conference following the weigh-in was no different. Reporters hurled questions at the champion, who soaked in the attention. "Do you see this fight as even a challenge?" one asked. The champion laughed, shaking his head. "A challenge? This isn't a fight. This is charity. He's lucky to share a stage with me. Tomorrow, I'll give the fans a show, then I'll end it quick. That's my gift to him, a few minutes of relevance. The room erupted with laughter. Cameras zoomed in on his grin, recording every angle of his arrogance. The outsider sat in silence, fists clenched beneath the table, every word another strike against him. One reporter, almost bored, finally turned to the outsider. "What do you have to say to the champ's prediction?" The room fell quiet for a moment, waiting for a response. The outsider leaned forward, his voice low, steady, deliberate. 30 seconds is all I need." The words cut through the air like a blade. No theatrics. No arrogance. Just certainty. The room chuckled nervously, some shaking their heads, dismissing him as delusional. The champion laughed the loudest. "You hear that?" he shouted, slamming his fist on the table for effect. "He thinks he's gonna knock me out in 30 seconds? He can't even last that long." The promoters laughed too, delighted at the show. To them, this was perfect, the king mocking the pretender, the crowd eating it up. But beneath the noise, beneath the jeers, the outsider's words lingered. Quiet. Sharp. Dangerous. After the conference, backstage, the corruption showed its face again. Promoters huddled with officials, whispering, "Make sure tomorrow goes smoothly. No surprises. The champ can't afford a blemish. The kid's just a prop. Don't let him steal the spotlight." The outsider heard none of it directly, but he didn't need to. He knew the whispers by now, felt the weight of them pressing in from every direction. The system wasn't built for him. It was built to bury him. Still, that night, he trained. Alone in the gym, long after the cameras shut off and the laughter faded, he pounded the heavy bag until his arms trembled. His reflection in the broken mirror glared back, scarred, silent, unyielding. The words repeated in his head, steady as his heartbeat, 30 seconds. Across the city, the champion celebrated. Surrounded by fans and friends, he raised glasses of expensive liquor, laughing at the outsider's audacity. "He thinks he can knock me out? Please. I'll dance around him, make him look like a fool. This fight's mine before it even starts." The room cheered. The system smiled. Arrogance ruled the night. But arrogance blinds. And in the silence of shadows, hunger sharpens. Tomorrow, the cage would close. Tomorrow, the world would watch. Tomorrow, the system would laugh again. And tomorrow, the storm would answer. The locker room was heavy with silence. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, faint and uneven, casting pale shadows across the cracked tile. The air reeked of sweat, liniment oil, and the faint metallic tang of blood soaked into old mats. Somewhere down the hall, the crowd's roar vibrated like distant thunder, rolling closer with every cheer. He sat alone on the bench, fists wrapped tight, head bowed. His coach leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes sharp. No entourage, no flashing cameras, no circus. Just two men against the weight of an entire system. Outside these walls, the script was already written. Promoters laughed in back offices, confident the night would go exactly as planned. Judges rehearsed their roles. Commentators polished their insults, ready to dismiss whatever the outsider did as reckless, lucky, or unrefined. The machine was turning, gears grinding, ready to swallow him whole. But inside the locker room, time slowed. The fighter lifted his head, staring at the floor, breathing steady. Every insult, every laugh, every stolen victory replayed in his mind like echoes bouncing through a tunnel. He remembered the champion's smirk, the slap at weigh-ins, the laughter of officials who treated him like dirt. Rage simmered, but rage wasn't enough. Rage without control was a weapon turned inward. Tonight, he needed more. The coach broke the silence. "They're not here for you. Not the judges. Not the refs. Not the promoters. They want you broken." The fighter didn't look up. He kept taping his hands tighter, rapping until the blood stopped at his fingertips. "Then I won't give them the chance." The old man studied him, voice low. "They're expecting a show. They're expecting you to fold. They want you humiliated." Finally, the fighter met his coach's gaze, eyes burning. 30 seconds. That's all I need." The words were quiet, but they carried weight. The coach said nothing more. He just nodded, because he'd heard those words before. And each time, they had cut through the noise like steel. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. A security guard opened the door. "It's time." The champion's locker room was different. Music blasted from speakers. Laughter filled the air. His entourage crowded around him, snapping photos, filming clips for social media. He strutted in front of mirrors, flexing, shadowboxing with lazy arrogance. "This is gonna be quick," he boasted. "I'll dance, make him look stupid, then end it." His team laughed, clapping him on the back, their confidence blinding. Injustice lived in that room, wrapped in gold chains and expensive watches. The system had built him into a king, and tonight was supposed to be another coronation. Back in the outsider's room, the noise of the crowd grew louder, rattling the walls. The announcer's voice boomed faintly from the arena, introducing fighters on the undercard. The fighter closed his eyes, shutting it all out. He heard only his breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Steady. Calm before the storm. The coach paced slowly, muttering under his breath. "They'll try to break you early. The ref will let him cheat. The judges won't see you land. But if you finish him, they can't deny it. Don't leave it to them. You hear me?" The fighter whispered back, "I know." Moments later, the official entered, clipboard in hand. His expression was cold, almost dismissive. "Rap check," he muttered, tugging at the fighter's taped hands. He barely looked, scribbled something on his sheet, then left without a word. No encouragement. No respect. Just procedure. The coach spat on the floor once the door closed. "They're treating you like you don't even exist." The fighter stood, shoulders broad, fists clenched. "Let them. They'll see me soon." The crowd's roar swelled again. Another fight ended. The announcer's voice thundered through the walls. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the main event." The room shook. The coach grabbed his fighter's shoulders, eyes fierce. "Listen to me. This isn't just a fight. This is everything. You've been waiting your whole life for this moment. You've been robbed, disrespected, mocked. Tonight you answer." The fighter nodded, jaw tight. "I've been ready." Down the hall, the champion laughed, high-fiving his team as he walked toward the entrance tunnel. The cameras followed, fans screamed, and the promoters smiled wide. The machine was rolling, confident nothing could stop it. But machines don't see storms until they're already inside them. The outsider stepped into the hallway, walking toward the tunnel. The noise grew louder with every step, a deafening storm of voices chanting for the king. Few called his name. Most jeered. But the sound didn't matter. He'd lived with the noise his entire life. Noise was nothing new. His coach walked beside him, whispering like a prayer. "Don't rush. Don't hesitate. Find your opening. End it before they steal it." The fighter's eyes never wavered. He whispered back, 30 seconds. The curtain loomed ahead. On the other side, the cage waited. On the other side, the system waited, laughing, smug, ready to bury him once and for all. The champion's music hit first, blasting through the arena. The crowd erupted, thousands of voices chanting his name. He danced into the light, arms wide, basking in adoration. He played to the cameras, kissed his fists, and climbed into the cage like it was his throne. The outsider's walk was different. His music echoed, but the cheers were faint, drowned out by jeers and boos. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He walked steady, fists clenched, eyes locked on the cage. Each step was a drumbeat, each breath a countdown. The noise blurred into silence in his head. The cage wasn't their stage. It was his battlefield. He stepped inside, the door clanging shut behind him. The mat smelled of sweat and disinfectant, the air hot and heavy with anticipation. Across from him, the champion danced, mocking him, grinning wide. The referee called them to the center. The champion smirked, leaning close. "I'm gonna make you wish you never stepped in here." The outsider said nothing. His eyes never moved. His silence was heavy, crushing, unbreakable. The referee gave instructions, his tone almost dismissive toward the outsider, his eyes favoring the king. The injustice was clear. Even here, in the final moments, the system pressed down. They returned to their corners. The crowd's roar was deafening, but in the outsider's head there was only silence. The referee raised his arm. The bell was seconds away. He whispered to himself, steady, certain, 30 seconds. The bell was about to ring. And when it did, the world would change. The cage door clanged shut with a metallic finality, the sound echoing through the arena like the closing of a vault. The crowd roared, a storm of voices crashing against the steel walls. Bright lights rained down, burning hot against the canvas, shadows stretching across the mat like long fingers reaching for blood. In one corner, the champion grinned, bouncing on his toes, arms loose at his sides. He soaked in the noise, raising his hands to taunt the crowd into an even greater frenzy. Their chants thundered his name, the arena vibrating with every syllable. To him, this was theater. A playground. A stage set for humiliation. Across from him, the outsider stood silent, fists clenched, breathing steady. His eyes never left the man in front of him. He didn't hear the jeers, the insults, or the boos. He didn't hear the commentators mocking his chances. All he heard was the sound of his own breath, steady and sharp, syncing with the pounding of his heart. The referee stood between them, glancing toward the champion with a subtle nod, barely looking at the outsider. His words were routine, dismissive, already favoring the king. Then his hand dropped, and the bell rang. The sound cut through the noise like a blade. The champion surged forward, arms wide, taunting. He danced, mocking footwork, hands dropped to his sides as if daring the outsider to swing. The crowd roared with laughter. "Clown him!" someone shouted from the front row. He obliged, sticking his tongue out, waving his arms like a showman. The outsider didn't move. He studied. His eyes tracked every feint, every careless flick of the champ's wrist, every arrogant tilt of the head. The silence in his mind deepened. He remembered every insult, every stolen fight, every whispered plot to bury him. The weight of all of it pressed onto this single moment. The champion threw a lazy jab, more mock than strike. The outsider slipped it easily, eyes never blinking. Another jab followed, then a smirk as the champ spun theatrically, taunting. The crowd howled, eating it up. The commentators laughed into their microphones. "He's making a fool of him already." But arrogance blinds. The outsider stepped forward, closing distance, his stance tight, coiled. The champion grinned wider, raising his chin, daring him to swing. "Come on," he shouted, loud enough for the cameras. "Hit me." The outsider didn't bite. He moved like a shadow, every step measured, every twitch calculated. He saw the champion's rhythm, careless, showy, open. He felt the timing, slow, indulgent, overconfident. The crowd saw arrogance. He saw opportunity. The champion flicked another jab, then swung wide with a looping hook, sloppy, reckless. The outsider's body moved before thought, instincts carved by years in alleys and warehouses. He slipped inside, the world slowing as his fist tightened. The first punch cracked against the champion's jaw like a gunshot. The crowd gasped, the laughter cut short. The champ stumbled back, eyes wide for the first time, grin faltering. Silence rippled across the arena, quick and sharp. The outsider didn't hesitate. He pressed forward, fists flying in precise bursts. A right cross snapped the champ's head back. A left hook buried into his ribs, the sound of impact sharp as thunder. The champion staggered, arms flailing, showmanship evaporating in an instant. The crowd erupted, a mix of shock and disbelief. Commentators stammered, their rehearsed lines crumbling. "Wah, he's hurt," one shouted, panic edging into his voice. The champion tried to recover, swinging wildly, desperation replacing arrogance. But the outsider was already inside, already locked on. His fists struck with the fury of every injustice he'd endured, every laugh, every stolen victory. Each punch was a sentence, each strike a chapter of survival written in blood. A right hand landed flush. The champion's legs buckled. The outsider's left hook followed, sharp, ruthless. The champion collapsed, crashing to the canvas, arms sprawled, eyes rolling back. The sound of his body hitting the mat was heavy, final. The referee froze for a heartbeat too long, eyes darting to the promoters at cage side. But the crowd's roar was deafening now, demanding truth, demanding acknowledgement. The referee had no choice. He dove in, waving his arms. It was over. 30 seconds. The arena exploded. Shockwaves rippled through the crowd, gasps and screams colliding with cheers. Fans who had jeered now leapt to their feet, hands clutching their heads in disbelief. Commentators fumbled for words, voices trembling with shock. It's over. 30 seconds. The outsider has done the impossible. The champion lay motionless, unconscious, his arrogance silenced in the most brutal way possible. His entourage stood frozen, mouths open, their laughter turned to horror. Promoters stared in disbelief, their carefully scripted show crumbling in an instant. And in the center of it all, the outsider stood tall, chest heaving, fists raised. No smirk. No celebration. Just silence in his eyes, heavy and certain. The system had tried to bury him. They mocked him, stacked the deck, plotted his humiliation. But the streets had taught him differently. The streets had sharpened him for this very moment. And in 30 seconds, he shattered the machine. The crowd's roar turned into chaos. Fans screamed. Commentators shouted. Promoters scrambled, already spinning excuses, already plotting damage control. But none of it mattered. The truth was undeniable. The king had fallen. The outsider turned, walking back to his corner, his coach's hand gripping his shoulder tight. The old man's eyes glistened, pride breaking through the years of cynicism. "They can't take this one," he whispered. "Not this time." The fighter didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was victory. His silence was thunder. The cage had been their stage. But tonight, it was his battlefield. And in 30 seconds, he had rewritten the story. The sound lingered. That final crack, the thud of the champion's body hitting the canvas, reverberated through the arena like a cannon blast. For a heartbeat, time froze. Thousands of faces stared in disbelief, mouths open, eyes wide, the weight of what they had just witnessed sinking in slowly, like a stone into water. Then the silence broke. A roar erupted, a storm of voices colliding in shock, confusion, and awe. Fans leapt from their seats, clutching their heads, screaming at the top of their lungs. Some shouted in disbelief, "No way!" while others cheered like they had witnessed a miracle. The chants of the champion's name, so thunderous moments earlier, evaporated into chaos. In their place, gasps and screams tore through the air. Commentators scrambled for words, their voices trembling with shock. "It's over. 30 seconds. The outsider he just destroyed the champion. This wasn't supposed to happen." Their tone shifted from scripted arrogance to panicked awe. Years of bias crumbled under the weight of undeniable truth. On the canvas, the champion lay still, his chest rising and falling shallowly. His eyes were glazed, his limbs limp. Officials rushed in, kneeling beside him, fanning his face, trying to revive him. His entourage pressed against the cage, screaming his name, their arrogance collapsing into fear. Moments ago, they were laughing. Now, they were silent. The outsider stood in the center of the cage, fists still clenched, chest heaving. His face was expressionless, carved from stone. He didn't gloat. He didn't dance. He didn't taunt. He simply stood, a monument to the storm he had just unleashed. 4 years, they had mocked him. 4 years, they had stolen his victories. 4 years, they had treated him as a pawn. And in 30 seconds, he had torn their empire apart. The referee, hesitant, finally grabbed his wrist and raised it high. The crowd exploded again, a mix of cheers and disbelief. Fans screamed his name for the first time, voices breaking through the decades of silence. The sound washed over him, but he didn't react. He wasn't fighting for their cheers. He was fighting for survival, for respect, for truth. Cameras zoomed in, desperate to capture his face, his sweat, the fire in his eyes. Reporters fumbled with their microphones, stammering questions they never prepared to ask. This wasn't the story they had written. This wasn't the humiliation they expected. This was chaos, and chaos didn't sell the way they planned. Backstage, promoters huddled in panic. Their golden boy, their chosen king, lay unconscious, while the fighter they mocked now stood victorious. Phones buzzed, Deals collapsed, narratives shattered. "Spin it," one shouted. "Call it luck. Say it was a fluke. We can't let this stand." Their voices cracked with fear, because they knew what everyone else had just seen. It wasn't luck. It was inevitability. The outsider's coach wrapped an arm around his shoulders, whispering into his ear. "They can't erase this. Not this. 30 seconds. They'll try, but they can't." The fighter didn't reply. His silence was louder than words, his eyes fixed on the chaos around him. The champion stirred faintly, groaning as medics hovered. The crowd gasped again, relief mixed with shame. Their king had fallen, but he wasn't gone. Still, the image of him sprawled unconscious on the canvas burned itself into their minds. No amount of excuses, no spin, no corruption could erase the truth carved into that moment. Social media exploded within minutes. Clips of the knockout spread like wildfire, phones raised in every section of the arena capturing the exact moment arrogance met reality. 30-second KO trended instantly. Memes mocked the champion's fall. Fans who had jeered hours before now claimed they always believed. The outsider's name, once ridiculed, now echoed across the digital world, carried by the punch heard around the arena. But the system wasn't ready to surrender. At the post-fight press conference, promoters sat stiffly, their smiles strained. Reporters, their voices cautious, asked if this was the beginning of a new era. The promoters shook their heads, clinging to the narrative. "It was a lucky punch," one said. "The champ wasn't prepared. This doesn't change who the real star is." Their words were hollow, their tone brittle, but they said them anyway. They had to. Their empire depended on it. The fighter sat at the end of the table, shoulders broad, sweat still drying on his skin. Reporters shouted questions at him, demanding soundbites, demanding an explanation. He leaned into the microphone, his voice low, steady, unshaken. 30 seconds. That's all it takes." The room fell quiet, the words hanging heavy in the air. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, promoters fidgeted uncomfortably. He didn't need to explain. The truth was already written on the canvas. Outside, fans crowded the exits, shouting his name, holding their phones high to capture a glimpse. The same people who had mocked him now begged for photos, for autographs, for a piece of the moment. He walked past them in silence, his coach shielding him from the chaos. In hotel rooms across the city, commentators replayed the knockout again and again, their voices trembling as they tried to make sense of it. "We underestimated him. Everyone did." Some tried to salvage their pride. The champ slipped. It happens. But the footage didn't lie. The punch was clean, perfect, undeniable. The whispers of corruption, once hidden in shadows, now surged into the open. Fans questioned the system. Why did they mock him? Why did they dismiss him? Why did they feed him to the champ if he wasn't ready? The cracks in the machine grew wider. The system had tried to bury him, but in doing so, they had given him the biggest stage of all. Still, danger lingered. The promoters would not forgive him for shattering their plan. The officials would not forget the embarrassment. The system, bruised and bloodied, would strike back. But for now, in this single night, the outsider stood undefeated. The punch was more than a victory. It was rebellion. It was defiance. It was proof that the streets could breed not just survivors, but kings. As he left the arena, the night air cool against his face, he whispered the words again, almost to himself, almost to the shadows that had raised him. 30 seconds. The city roared around him, but inside, he was calm. The storm had arrived. The machine had cracked. And nothing would ever be the same. The punch echoed long after the lights dimmed. Fans spilled into the streets, voices raw from screaming, their phones still lit with replays of the knockout. Bars replayed the clip on loop, each crowd reacting as though it had happened fresh. Gasps, laughter, disbelief. The city pulsed with the energy of shock. The underdog had silenced a king in 30 seconds, and for a fleeting moment, justice felt real. But justice unsettles those who thrive on control. Behind closed doors, the mood was different. Promoters sat hunched around a polished table, their faces pale, their glasses of whiskey untouched. Papers lay scattered, contracts, sponsorship deals, endorsements, all centered on one man who now lay in a hospital bed instead of on a throne. Their chosen champion, their golden product, had crumbled before the world. "This is a disaster," one hissed, voice tight with panic. Another slammed his fist against the table. "We can fix it. Call it luck. Call it a fluke. We spin the narrative before it gets out of control." "Too late," a third muttered, scrolling through his phone. Clips of the knockout flooded every screen. Fans were already chanting the outsider's name in the streets. Hashtags burned through social media. The truth had escaped, and the system struggled to pull it back. Still, they tried. By morning, headlines shifted. "Champion caught cold. Lucky shot stuns the world." Commentators parroted the line, their voices rehearsed. It was a wild punch. 9 out of 10 times, the champ wins that fight. The outsider's triumph was twisted into an accident, his victory reduced to chance. In interviews, officials praised the champion's courage, his charisma, his years of dominance. About the outsider, they said little. "He had his moment," one promoter admitted with a forced smile. "But this doesn't make him a star. Stars are built, not stumbled into." The disrespect dripped like venom. The betrayal cut deeper when rumors surfaced of an immediate rematch. Not to reward the outsider, but to restore the king. "The fans want to see the champ back," promoters claimed. "They want redemption." The truth was simpler. The machine needed to repair itself. The outsider's victory had been a crack in the armor, and they were desperate to seal it. The fighter listened to the words from a distance, his jaw tight. He had earned this moment. He had knocked their king cold in front of the world. But instead of recognition, he was dismissed again, his victory branded as luck, his worth denied. He trained anyway. The gym lights flickered overhead as he pounded the heavy bag, each strike heavier than the last. Sweat poured, breath sharp, muscles screaming. His coach stood nearby, anger burning in his eyes. "They're already rewriting it," the old man growled. "They can't stand that you embarrass them. They'll do anything to bury you again." The fighter said nothing, only hit harder. His silence was louder than rage. Sponsors joined the betrayal. Companies that lined up behind the champion suddenly vanished, contracts shredded. Not one came to the outsider. "He's unpredictable," they whispered. "Not marketable. Not safe." They poured millions into the champ's recovery, while the man who had stolen the night received nothing but shadows. Even the commentators mocked him. On late-night shows, they laughed at the idea of him as a champion. "One-hit wonder," they sneered. "He got lucky. He doesn't belong with the elites." Their laughter was a dagger, twisting in the wound. But whispers outside the machine told another story. Fans argued in bars, on forums, in gyms across the world. "You can't call that luck. He destroyed him." Videos slowed down the knockout frame by frame, proving the precision, the timing, the inevitability. The people saw what the system refused to admit. The outsider was real. The tension grew. One night, walking home from training, the fighter felt eyes on him. A black car idled at the curb, windows tinted. The door cracked open, and a voice called out. "You made enemies," the voice said, low and sharp. "Be careful. They don't forgive embarrassment." The car pulled away before he could answer, disappearing into the night. His coach shook his head when he told him, "They'll do more than smear you. Watch your back." The betrayal deepened when contracts for future fights came. They weren't offers. They were traps. Short notice, unfair weight cuts, dangerous opponents stacked against him. The machine wanted him broken, humiliated, erased. His 30 seconds of truth had cost them too much. But he didn't bend. He signed anyway, whispering to himself the words that had carried him this far. 30 seconds. Fans rallied louder. At events, chants of his name broke through, defying the promoter's scripts. Clips of the knockout refused to die, shared and reshared, each time with captions mocking the arrogance of the fallen king. The people had seen. And once people see, they don't forget. Still, the betrayal was relentless. Judges scored against him in fights he clearly won. Commentators dismissed his victories as sloppy. Promoters denied him main events, shoving him onto undercards while the champion, recovering from his loss, was promised the spotlight again. The system wasn't just corrupt. It was vengeful. The fighter bore it all in silence. His fists spoke louder. Each fight became another rebellion, another defiance. Each victory was a reminder. The streets had bred him for this, and no machine could erase the truth. But betrayal doesn't fade. It lingers, sharp and poisonous, twisting into the cracks of every victory. And as he trained, as he bled, as he fought, the whispers continued. The system was plotting, preparing its strike. The outsider had won the battle. But the war was far from over. One night, standing alone in the gym, sweat dripping onto the floor, he stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror. His voice was low, steady, certain. "They'll never respect me. So I'll make them fear me." The silence that followed was heavy, unbreakable. And somewhere in the shadows, the machine sharpened its knives. The streets remembered the knockout. Fans in bars replayed it until their voices went hoarse. Clips flooded every phone, every feed, every conversation. For the people, it was truth. The outsider had broken the king. But for the machine, it was a wound, and wounds demand revenge. The first strike was subtle. Headlines shifted. Commentators used the same word again and again. Fluke. "Sure, he landed a big shot," one laughed on air. "But anybody can get lucky. One punch doesn't make you a champion." Another scoffed. "He's reckless. Wild. That style won't last." The narrative was seeded, watered by arrogance, nurtured by corruption. Next came the whispers of scandal. Anonymous sources leaked rumors of failed drug tests. "Something doesn't add up," a promoter hinted, his grin sly. Reporters repeated it without evidence, headlines swelling, outsider's victory under question. No test results were released, no proof shown, but the doubt stuck like tar. Contracts followed, but they weren't rewards, they were punishments. Offers came on short notice, against opponents who had months to prepare. Venues were changed at the last minute, forcing him into sleepless travel, into cages far from the roar of supportive crowds. Weights were manipulated, referees handpicked, judges chosen with cold precision. Every detail tilted against him, the system grinding its gears, desperate to grind him down. His coach saw it clearly. "They're setting you up to fail," he muttered one night as they trained under the flickering lights of the old gym. "They'll rob you until you're broke, humiliate you until you're forgotten. That's how they win." The fighter didn't stop. Each punch cracked against the bag, sweat flying, ribs aching. "Then I won't give them the chance," he whispered. The injustice grew heavier. In one fight, his opponent landed an illegal knee. The crowd gasped, his coach screamed, but the referee looked away, waving them to continue. Blood streamed down his face, his vision blurred, but he fought on. He won the bout in brutal fashion, fists breaking through his opponent's guard until the man crumpled. The crowd roared. But when the decision was read, the judges awarded it to the other fighter. Boos thundered, fans threw drinks, chaos erupted. Yet the machine didn't flinch. The outsider's victory had been erased. Afterward, reporters shoved microphones in his face. "What do you think of the judge's decision?" He stared at them, jaw tight, eyes burning. "They can rob me," he said, voice low, "but they can't stop me." The word spread, clipped into viral soundbites, fueling fans' rage. But to the promoters, it was defiance, and defiance demanded punishment. The smear campaigns escalated. Articles painted him as dangerous, unhinged, a street brawler with no discipline. Late-night hosts joked about him, sneering at his background. Sponsors blacklisted him, claiming he was too risky. Even gyms began to distance themselves, fearful of losing favor with the machine. He became a pariah, not because of who he was, but because of what he represented, a crack in their carefully controlled empire. Still, the fans rallied. Chants of his name broke through at events, defying the promoters' attempts to silence him. Clips of the knockout refused to die, replayed endlessly, fueling debates that raged online. Some called him a fraud. Others called him the truth. The war for his name had begun. The pressure grew darker. Late one night, as he left training, two men in suits approached. Their smiles were sharp, their eyes cold. "You've had your moment," one said smoothly. "But it's over. Play your role, or your career ends here." The fighter didn't blink. His fists clenched, his voice steady. 30 seconds, he whispered, then walked past them into the night. The threats didn't stop him. If anything, they sharpened him. Training became obsession. He ran until his lungs burned, lifted until his arms trembled, sparred until his body screamed. Pain was no longer the enemy. Pain was the price. And he was willing to pay it all. But the system's strikes cut deeper. Contracts were manipulated so he was paid scraps compared to the champion, even after shattering him. Travel delays left him stranded before bouts. Medical checks discovered phantom injuries to stall his fights. His name was erased from promotional posters, his victories buried beneath headlines about others. The machine didn't just want to beat him. It wanted to erase him. His coach watched with fury. They'll never give you fairness. Not now. You embarrassed them in front of the world. They'll bleed you dry before they ever let you rise. The fighter's eyes burned, voice calm. Then I'll rise anyway. The corruption grew brazen. In one bout, he dominated every round, fists punishing, knees crushing, his opponent broken and gasping. The crowd roared, sensing undeniable victory. Yet when the bell rang and the scores were read, the judges called it a draw. Gasps filled the arena, boos rained down, fans screamed in protest. Commentators stumbled, scrambling to justify the injustice. The fighter stood silent in the cage, his jaw tight, his fists still clenched. His silence was louder than their lies. Afterward, fans chanted outside arenas, holding signs, demanding justice. He won. He earned it. Their voices shook the walls the promoters tried to build. The system tightened, panicking, but the people had seen too much. Still, the betrayal weighed heavy. Alone in the gym, sweat dripping onto the mats, he stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The scars on his face told the story. The world saw chaos. He saw purpose. They'll never stop, his coach warned. I won't either, he whispered. The storm had begun with 30 seconds. Now it was war. The system had struck back, sharp and merciless. But storms aren't broken by walls. They tear them down. And the outsider was no longer just a fighter. He was the storm itself. The streets had made him. The cage had revealed him. The system had tried to break him. But in the end, all that remained was the fight. And the fight had always been his. The scars told the story. His knuckles, split and hardened. His ribs, lined with hairline fractures. His brow, etched with cuts that never fully healed. Every mark was a receipt, proof of the wars he had survived. Yet for all the damage, none of it slowed him. If anything, each scar became another weapon. The streets had carved him into something the system couldn't understand, a man who refused to fall. After the draw that robbed him, fans had flooded the streets, chanting his name. Videos of the chaos outside the arena spread online, hundreds shouting, fists raised, demanding justice. Promoters scrambled, spinning lies, but the roar of the people couldn't be silenced. The outsider wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was a symbol, a reminder that corruption could be beaten, that arrogance could bleed. And so they fed him another test. Another chosen fighter, polished, protected, packaged for the cameras. A man the promoters called the future, built up to erase the storm before it grew too strong. The night of the fight, the arena was electric. Fans packed the seats, half chanting for the golden prospect, half for the man the system tried to bury. Commentators pushed the narrative. This is where the hype train ends. The outsider's been exposed. Tonight, the future arrives. But when the bell rang, the outsider answered with violence. From the first punch, the fight was brutal. The prospect was quick, polished, his strikes crisp, his movements sharp. But the outsider walked through them, eyes burning, fists relentless. Blood poured from his lip as he pressed forward, every strike carrying years of rage. The prospect panicked, backpedaling, his face twisted in disbelief. This wasn't the script. This wasn't the story the promoters had written. The outsider's fists wrote their own story. A right hand shattered the prospect's nose. A left hook caved his guard. Knees slammed into ribs until the man gasped for air. The crowd roared, chaos shaking the arena as the outsider unleashed every ounce of survival carved into his bones. When the referee dove in to save the prospect, the fight ended in carnage. The outsider stood drenched in sweat and blood, his and his opponent's, eyes unflinching, chest heaving. The crowd erupted, chanting his name louder than ever before. Promoters scowled at cage-side, their empire cracking further. Commentators stammered, trying to call it reckless, trying to downplay the dominance, but the truth was undeniable. Redemption had been written in blood, and the people saw it. More tests followed. More prospects. More future champions. Each one fell. Some crumbled in minutes. Others dragged him into wars that left both men scarred. But in every battle, the outsider walked forward, refusing to break. Each victory was another rebellion. Each knockout another nail in the coffin of the system's lies. But the machine didn't give up. They changed tactics. Instead of prospects, they gave him veterans, old names, legends past their prime. If he won, they'd call it meaningless. If he lost, they'd brand him exposed. The injustice was suffocating, but he fought anyway. And when those legends fell before him, when their experience couldn't withstand his fury, the people cheered louder than ever. The outsider bled for every inch. His face swelled, his body bruised, his lungs burned. But every time he stumbled, he rose. Every time he bled, he fought harder. The system wanted to bury him in blood. Instead, he baptized himself in it, rising stronger, hungrier, more relentless than before. Fans began calling him the Storm. The name spread online, chanted in arenas, painted on signs. Promoters tried to silence it, commentators tried to dismiss it, but the people had chosen. The Storm wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was defiance personified. The champion he had destroyed months earlier returned, his recovery spun into a tale of courage. Promoters pushed him back into the spotlight, declaring his loss nothing more than a stumble. "The king is back," they said. "The fluke will be erased." The rematch was announced, and the system sharpened its knives. Back in the old gym, the outsider trained in silence. His coach wrapped his hands, eyes tired but burning with pride. "They'll never forgive you for embarrassing him," the coach said. "This fight isn't about redemption for you. It's about redemption for them. They'll cheat. They'll lie. They'll throw everything at you." The fighter stared into the cracked mirror, his reflection scarred and unbroken. His voice was steady, certain. "Then I'll end it again. And this time, they'll never laugh." Training became war. His fists split open on heavy bags, blood soaking the tape. His lungs burned with endless sprints, legs pounding against concrete until his knees screamed. Every day, every night, he whispered the same words. 30 seconds. It wasn't just a mantra anymore. It was prophecy. The people rallied behind him. In bars, in gyms, in streets across the world, fans chanted his name, posted his knockouts, spread his story. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been dismissed, cheated, silenced. His redemption was theirs. The night of the rematch arrived. The arena burned with energy, fans split between the king and the Storm. Promoters smiled smugly, convinced their chosen one would rise again. Commentators rehearsed their lines, ready to dismiss the outsider no matter the outcome. The machine was confident. But machines don't understand storms. The outsider walked to the cage in silence, the crowd's roar washing over him. The champion strutted, arrogance dripping, his smile wide. He raised his arms, shouting promises of revenge. The people cheered, the machine grinned, but beneath it all, the outsider's eyes never wavered. As the cage door closed, the air grew heavy, thick with tension. The referee gave instructions, his tone already biased, his gaze lingering on the champion. But the outsider heard nothing. His world had narrowed to one truth. Redemption doesn't come in words. Redemption comes in blood. The bell was about to ring. The cage door shut again. The sound echoed through the arena like a steel drum, final and absolute. This was no ordinary fight. This was a reckoning. Months of mockery, years of injustice, decades of struggle, all of it balanced on this one night. The king had returned, rebuilt, protected by the machine that could not afford to see him fall again. And across from him stood the Storm, silent and scarred, carrying the weight of every betrayal he had endured. The lights burned hot, the roar of the crowd deafening. Half chanted for the champion, clinging to the illusion of his invincibility. Half screamed for the outsider, voices raw with defiance. The air was thick with tension, every heartbeat a drum, every breath a countdown. The referee's eyes lingered on the champion, his words sharp but skewed, the favoritism plain. It didn't matter. The outsider had lived in injustice so long it was simply the air he breathed. The bell rang. The champion exploded forward, sharper than before, his strikes precise, his footwork polished. This was no clowning spectacle. This was desperation, fueled by pride and the weight of a broken empire. He threw combinations with speed, snapping punches into the outsider's guard. The crowd roared approval, convinced the storm had met its end. But storms don't retreat. The outsider absorbed the strikes, eyes unflinching, his stance steady. Each punch landed, but each one cost the champion more energy. Arrogance had blinded him before. Now, pride dragged him into a war he couldn't afford. The first counter came quick. A jab from the outsider, sharp and precise, cracked against the champion's nose. Blood spurted, crimson against the bright lights. The crowd gasped, the tide shifting. The champion snarled, swinging harder, faster, desperate to erase the memory of 30 seconds. But desperation breeds mistakes. The outsider slipped a wild hook and answered with a crushing right hand. The impact echoed like thunder, the champion stumbling, his eyes wide. The crowd screamed, a storm of chaos breaking loose. The machine panicked. Commentators scrambled, shouting excuses. He slipped. The champ just needs to recover. Judges exchanged nervous glances. Promoters leaned forward, their empire trembling with every second. The outsider pressed forward, fists flying like hammers. Each strike was a chapter of his story, every robbery avenged, every insult punished, every betrayal repaid. Blood poured from the champion's face, his arrogance shattered, his crown slipping with each blow. Still, the champ fought back. Pride wouldn't let him fall quietly. He swung with fury, desperation in every punch, rage in every kick. But the storm didn't bend. He walked through it all, relentless, inevitable. Then it happened. The outsider feinted left, drew the champ's guard wide, and unleashed a right hand so clean it silenced the arena. The punch cracked against the jaw, snapping the king's head back. His body folded, collapsing onto the canvas. The crowd erupted in chaos, screams, gasps, cheers, disbelief. The referee hesitated, almost willing the champ to rise. But the body lay still, motionless, broken. The storm had struck again. The official had no choice. He dove in, waving it off. It was over. The outsider stood tall in the center of the cage, chest heaving, fists raised. His silence was deafening, louder than any celebration. The system had tried to bury him, to erase him, to silence him. And yet, under the brightest lights, with the whole world watching, he had done it again. The champion lay unconscious, the machine in ruins. Promoters sat frozen, their empire crumbling. Commentators stuttered, unable to spin the undeniable. Fans screamed his name, thousands chanting, voices shaking the arena to its core. Redemption had come. Not through their approval, not through their recognition, but through blood. At the post-fight press conference, promoters tried to cling to scraps. "He got lucky again," one muttered weakly, but no one believed it. Reporters ignored them, their cameras fixed on the storm. He leaned into the microphone, voice low, steady. "You can mock me. You can rob me. You can stack the deck. But you can't stop me. 30 seconds. Twice." The words reverberated like thunder. Reporters scribbled furiously. Fans online erupted. The system had no answer. Later that night, he walked alone beneath the city lights, the noise of celebration echoing in the distance. His coach walked beside him, silent, pride burning in his tired eyes. The storm had risen, and the empire had fallen. The streets had bred him. The system had betrayed him. But in the end, he had carved his own justice. The storm doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for respect. It takes what cannot be denied. And tonight, the storm had taken everything. Don't forget to comment where you're watching from, like this video, and subscribe for more stories.